Good morning, everyone, or afternoon to those of you joining us from India, and welcome to today's webinar about making the most of the trade opportunities that exist between the UK and India, brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade in partnership with the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host today. And it is a real delight to be presenting to so many traders from both the UK and India, particularly given the growing excitement around a potential trade deal between our countries. So I hope you find today's session useful. But on the next slide, to begin today's webinar, before we introduce our speakers, we're going to run a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we are here asking which of these describes your current trade. You can select all that apply here, including exporting from the UK to India, the other way round, or you may be planning to export between the two countries, or you may not trade yet between the UK and India. Now, while you're answering that poll, just some quick housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window, which is usually to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today throughout the session, but please note we cannot guarantee we will get to every question in the allocated time. As such, I will be prioritizing questions that are relevant to the wider audience, so I won't be going into company or sector-specific queries as such. And please note that if your questions are short and clear, I am more likely to be able to read them. Finally, you will receive a recording of the webinar with a copy of the slides and a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So thank you everyone who's responded so far to the poll. I'm just going to close it in 3, 2, 1. And here are the results. So 31% of you are exporting from the UK to India already. A fifth of you doing it the other way around. A quarter of you planning to from the UK to India. 16% of you the other way around again. And then 27% of you do not currently trade between the UK and India. So it's a pretty mixed audience here. Thank you everyone for responding to that poll. But on the next slide, we're going to see a little bit more about our fantastic panel of speakers today. We're delighted to be joined again by Professor Sangeeta Khurana, the chair of the Institute's academic board and professor of economics at Bournemouth University, with vast experience researching and advising on trade between the UK and India and more broadly trade deal negotiations. We're also glad to be joined again by Ray Bergin, the Education Delivery Team Leader at the Institute's Academy. Ray has over 40 years experience in customs and trade and will later on be presenting on the practical considerations for businesses trading between the UK and India. And it is my delight to welcome Professor Jaideep Mukherjee, Head of Economics at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, or IIFT, who brings over 23 years of teaching and research experience on international business to today's webinar. We'll also hear later from Professor Jaideep about the importance of learning how to do trade properly in order to benefit from the opportunities that exist between the UK and India. We're going to be sharing the slides with registrants after today's webinar if you'd like to read more about our panelists later on. But for now, on the next slide, we will be beginning today's discussion. And we're going to discuss in the next 20 minutes or so the UK-India trade opportunity and what impact a trade agreement could have on this. But before we do, Sangeeta, if I can begin with yourself, I'll just share again the results to the poll. I mean, is that a surprising response? It's not always the easiest poll to gauge when it's a mixed response, but is that about what you'd expect in terms of the number of businesses that are already making the most of that opportunity to do trade between the UK and India?
Thank you so much, Will. Yes, the poll result is not really unexpected, because if you look at the current relationship between the UK and India, we know that there's a lot of trade that's happening between these two countries. And what actually contextualizes the importance of the trade agreement is this slide. Basically, it's telling us that yes, there is trade, and a trade agreement between the UK and India will actually enable businesses to trade even more and benefit from lower trade costs, it would boost economic activity in both countries in areas of competitive strength. So basically, I would say, that as I look as I see at the poll results, that the trade deal would be an opportunity to deepen the economic and strategic ties between both the countries, but most importantly, provide a platform for firms to be able to increase market access in each other's countries.
Thank you, Professor Sangeeta. And if I can bring in Professor Jaideep from the Indian perspective, I mean, Professor Sangeeta said there that this shows that there's good trade, but there's an opportunity to do more, and a trade deal may help. Is that what's being said in an Indian context as well?
Yeah, it is a very good afternoon and morning also in UK. So this result is not very surprising. It's a mixed result, and I also agree with Professor Khurana that both India and UK being the top exporters and importers of both merchandise and services. So economically, a trade deal between the two nations makes sense. Having said that, it is very interesting also to know that among the exporters, both from UK to India and India to UK, or the potential exporters, a breakup between the merchandise and service would have been more interesting, because potentially India and UK do a lot of trade in services, and any trade agreement or any proposed negotiation between the two countries cannot be only based on merchandise, but it should also encompass trade in services as well. I am sure that many of the exporters who have voted and who are listening are doing trade in service as well. So result is interesting, but not surprising. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jaideep. And we've got a few questions on services, which we'll come to shortly. But just before we do that, I just wanted to pick up on, you both highlighted that a trade deal could help trade between the two countries. I mean, as you allude to, Jaideep, that's often more for goods traders. But could we just expand a little bit in terms of what impact a trade deal will have for goods exporters? Well, in what ways does a trade deal support this trade? I wonder if I can bring in Ray at this stage to cover this question initially.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I mean, there are nothing but benefits that can come from an actual trade deal. The agreement there will help traders actually expand their existing trading activities, and seeing the results on the poll of those that are planning or not currently trading yet, it will be interesting to see that once the trade agreement is ratified and underway, we hold a poll 6 months later, and I'm sure that those figures will improve and be vastly different to what we're seeing today. But certainly the benefits there, and I'll cover more in some of the presentation that I'll be doing later on, and focusing on what Dr. Jaideep was talking about, services. Certainly services and the transfer of technology and information is a huge market. And I'm just wondering if that's reflective of the physical, tangible market that becomes tighter and tighter. It's great to see new product development and new markets being explored, but I can appreciate and understand that gets more difficult. So then services, I think, is now starting to be a great benefit for some traders.
Thank you, Ray. We're actually going to just launch a quick poll, actually, just asking you, the audience, what you think the most significant benefits of a UK-India trade agreement would be for your business, including reduced tariffs, easier travel, mutual recognition of qualifications, reduced bureaucracy. And if you do say other, please do type in what you think other would mean for you in using the chat facility there. But what I'm hearing is, obviously, here are some of the classic benefits of trade deals, around tariffs and kind of reducing paperwork, particularly for goods exporters. But actually what we should be looking at more is perhaps a trade deal which has broader support for the businesses who actually do trade between the UK and India. So looking at the sectors and then tailoring the trade deal between between the countries to support those sectors. Is that a correct understanding, Ray? And then I'll bring in Sangeeta.
No, spot on, Will. Yes. Yeah.
Good stuff. I mean, Sangeeta, anything to add there, just in terms of, should a trade deal, often these are the main benefits, but should it be encapsulating other aspects for UK-India trade because of its unique, the unique nature of UK-India trade?
So if I may add, the trade deal will actually create significant effects both regionally and globally. And this would be in the short and in the long run for both the partners, in the sense that there would be economic effects, there would be dynamic effects that would come from the trade deal. And by saying this, I mean that the trade deal will lead to not only greater trade, but will foster innovation, technology cooperation, as well as skills transfer and knowledge sharing between the UK and India.
Terrific. Dr. Jaydeep, anything to add on that point?
Yes, thank you. And in my view, I think the other part can include three things. First, from an Indian perspective, it will include the non-tariff barriers as well. So you are writing about the reduced tariffs, but what about the non-tariff issues? So I think other can include the non-tariff issues, but the non-tariff barriers that hinder the trade relation. The second thing is how India's advantage in service sector can be leveraged through GVC integrated to UK. So one is the GVC participation. So I potentially believe these are the two things that can be included in the other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll share the results to the poll, which, as ever, always were very revealing. So thank you everyone for responding. So 61% of you have said reduce tariffs, 2% of you easier travel, 5% of you mutual recognition of qualifications, 27% of you reduced bureaucracy. For the 5% of you said other, please do type in what you think that might mean. We're going to do a question in a second about sectors, but I mean, from that, I would probably gauge that we've probably got quite a lot of goods exporters on the line today. Is that what you take from that, Ray?
Yes, I'm not surprised at all with those results. They're very reflective. Even our communications with our members and students through our activities in the UK and discussions with IIFT. The primary objectives are to reduce costs and lessen the burden of process and documentation. With the process and documentation around the bureaucracy, digitization is going to make that a lot slicker, faster, and hopefully take out some of that burden as well. So that digitized process will make things more secure, so traders don't have to keep repeating stuff. They don't have to keep recreating information because it will stay in the digital world and just be farmed in and out of transactions. So the hope is that will actually improve, and certainly the cost benefits are going to be very good with the trade deal.
And Professor Jaydeep, I mean, tariffs has come up as a very significant thing there, but Ray's just alluded to one of the points you made around the non-tariff barriers around, some of the checks and documentation and the role that potentially digitalization could have in supporting traders to have less of that potentially. I mean, could you just expand a little bit on the point you made earlier about non-tariff barriers and why they are important as well as tariffs?
Okay, actually the result is a little bit surprising to me personally, because while it is true that reduced tariffs and reduced bureaucracy, these are important, particularly to reduce the transaction cost in terms of the logistics issue, the supply chain issues, etc. So obviously, reduction in cost is a major benefit for this India-UK free trade agreement, no doubt on that. But why I try to stress on the non-tariff barriers is because major part of the documentation or the things that Indian exporters to UK are exposed to are in terms of the non-tariff barriers. So any trade agreement between the two countries should focus not only on the tariff, but also on the non-tariff issues if we have to have a true market access for both exporters from both the sides. And of course, mutual recognition of qualification, this is another very interesting part. I'm sure that the entire 5% who have voted for it must be dealing with the service sector part of it. And this is an important aspect which needs to be addressed in this free trade agreement. So while couple of things are in the line, but reduced tariffs should be accompanied with reduced non-tariff barriers or easing out of the non-tariff barriers as well. So this is what I feel. Rest, I think it's as per the standard line.
Professor Sangeeta, I can bring you on here because I think I tend to generally agree with Professor Jaideep. We've seen it in a UK-EU context over here in terms of you can have a trade deal with your largest trading partner and it can remove all sorts of tariffs, but it's as Professor Jaideep alludes to, it's the non-tariff barriers, it's the new checks and documentation which comes in that can actually be much more obstructive to trade than tariffs necessarily. So what's your view in it from a UK perspective? Is that poll result surprising to you as well?
Thank you so much. I tend to 100% agree with what Professor Jaideep has said. My hunch is, looking at the results of the poll, my hunch is that we have a lot of people attending from the exporters, attending from the UK, because the primary issue they are pointing out is high tariffs. And let me put this into context. If you look at the tariff profile of India, we see that the simple average tariffs that the UK exporters face is quite high, actually. It's around 14.5% in India. But if you look at it from the Indian exporters' perspective, it is just 4.2% tariffs that they face when they export to the UK. So it makes me think that there are more, we have a lot of listeners who are actually looking to export into India. Now, I tend to 100% agree that non-tariff barriers are something that are really very important. That's the elephant in the room that needs addressing within the context of the trade deal, because all the benefits that will come from the trade deal in terms of reduction of tariff can only materialize and can be reaped when non-tariff barriers are addressed. And when I talk about non-tariff barriers, I am essentially referring to regulatory obstacles that must be reduced within the context of the trade agreement. Because if these regulatory obstacles are not reduced, like, for example, high level of bureaucracy, then market access will not be facilitated. And it's very important to reduce non-tariff barriers, because this is how we will be able to encourage a transparent, predictable, and a stable regulatory framework for exporters and importers on both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to another poll now, and this will be interesting to see. We're asking basically what type of goods or services you trade, and physical goods, parts, components, professional services, software technology, and others. So it'd be really interesting to see if this tallies with how the audience has responded to the other poll. Just while people are asking that, just in terms of a potential trade deal, we've had a few people ask about different sectors. We had someone ask about food and drink in particular. Sammy has asked, how the trade deal will support the food and drink sector. I mean, I just wonder if we can just kind of talk briefly for a bit about which sectors may benefit most from a trade deal. Sangeeta, do you want to start on that one?
Thank you so much, Will. Yes, it's very interesting to look at the diversity of sectors that will benefit from this trade deal. So in terms of the impact on different sectors from the UK perspective, I think the largest increase in economic activity and gains would be for the equipment, transport equipment, for manufacture of electric equipment, in terms of goods, motor vehicle sectors. But let's go back to the point that we've been discussing about the importance of services, because both these economies are primarily service-oriented exporters. So India is the third largest exporter of services to the UK. And if you ask me, the benefits will actually come for both the partners from a trade deal that looks at various aspects of services trade. Having said this, for India, there would be benefits in terms of drugs and pharmaceutical companies, textiles, telecom, communication, and information services. This is where India has specialization. So I think I'll ask my other panelists to also feed in their comments. Thank you.
Professor Jaydeep, would you like to start from an Indian perspective?
Yeah, I think what Professor Khurana has pointed out, I fully agree with her, that service sector is one sector where there are a lot of potentials for both the countries. And a trade deal is expected to widen the market access both for the Indian as well as the UK service firms. At the same time, there are some sectors, I think, which can be included under the other, like, for example, the food processing sector and the pharmaceutical sector, because they attract very high FDI in India, and they also contribute to strong labor productivity and employment generation for India. So these are very vital from Indian perspective. And interestingly, many of these sectors have very high export potential in UK. So I believe that apart from the sectors which are mentioned, and also the service sector that has been pointed out by Professor Khurana, the food processing sector and the pharmaceutical sector are equally important. So probably they can be included under the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jaydeep. I'll share a response to the poll now, and I should say that unfortunately we'll go to webinar. There's a limitation on how many options you can put into these questions, so it is a maximum of 5, which is why we do include the other there. But I think this does tally with the responses to the previous polls: 60% physical goods, 21% parts and components, 12% professional services. Ray, do you want to just briefly comment there? Is that about what you'd expect from the webinars you've been on before?
Yes, I'm sort of listening to Professor Sangeeta and the other comments there. Certainly, you know, going back to food, where we've got such global, not conflicts, but we've got issues going around the world at the moment that are impacting the flow of food and certain staple food products. I certainly still see that food and other food products are going to be sort of quite a focus within trade deals, certainly between ourselves and India, as you know, the restrictions around other parts of the world channeling food when you know, demand is still there, but we've got conflicts and other challenges going around.
It's a really important point, actually. There's been a huge kind of impact on trade flows from the war in Ukraine, but also the pandemic and all sorts of geopolitical issues of the last few years, and that of course impacts all trade relationships, including UK, India. Conscious of time, so I was going to ask a question about the broader impact of what the trade deal means for UK trade policy and inter-trade policy. I might come back to that at the end. And just do a question now, just about, so this webinar is a partnership between the Institute of Export and International Trade in the UK and the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade in India. So I was just wondering, Professor Sangeeta, initially, do you just want to say a few words about what this relationship is hopefully becoming?
Thank you so much, Will. At the Institute, we are really excited about this partnership that we've set up with the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. On a personal level, I've been working with them for a very long time. On a professional level, I think this will be a great opportunity for both the institutions to actually provide new training roll out new training programs, delve into new training opportunities that exist. And most importantly, I think we can actually create a platform where we can connect businesses to trade with each other within the context of the trade deal. And in doing so, inform businesses how they can work together to reap the benefits of the trade deal. Because as we alluded to the fact to non-tariff barriers and the regulatory obstacles. So essentially, this partnership will facilitate businesses across borders. And I think it would also contribute to building knowledge and expertise about trade and economic issues, and in fact contribute to the dynamic and economic living bridge that we propose to create between the UK, that we are looking to create between the UK and India. Thank you.
Terrific stuff. I mean, Professor Jaydeep, I know you're going to talk a bit about it later on as well, but do you want to just add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that this is a great opportunity for both the institutes to act as complements. And if offered an opportunity to launch the joint program, I think it will be beneficial for exporters as well as for anyone who are interested in the India-UK trade dynamics. If the free trade agreement, the proposed free trade agreement, if it comes in place in very near future, obviously it can change the dynamics. So these dynamics need to be understood both from the Indian perspective as well as from the UK perspective. And Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, being the think tank for the government of India and having done extensive research in terms of the training of the exporters. So probably some thousands of exporters we have trained over the last 60 years of our existence. I think we can be a very ideal partner with your institute and can offer the training to the exporters to understand the market access issues, product identification issues, investment opportunities that are available, and also built on the simulation in terms of the tariff reduction and the obstacles that hinder the export between the two countries in terms of the non-tariff barriers. So we look forward to this mutual cooperation and collaboration. Thank you.
Well, that's terrific stuff, and we'll be hearing more from Professor Jaydeep about the IIFT in particular later on in the webinar. But that's been a really, I think, useful conversation, which I hope sets the scene for the opportunities that already exist between the UK and India, and hopefully will become even more prevalent with the potential signing of the trade deal. But at this stage, on the next slide, I'd like to hand over to Ray Bergin, who's going to give a quick overview of some of the practical considerations businesses need to be making if trading between the UK and India. So over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Will. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Bergin, and you saw some of the information on my profile at the start of the session. So I'm just going to go through a number of the thought processes that you might want to sort of take on board. But the other thing about this webinar is that between ourselves and the IIFT team, we thought this would be actually a great springboard, a great opportunity to start to get to understand what you're looking for and how we can respond to that and come up and start developing a more formalized training program in the near future. So certainly hope that you're going to gain a lot of benefit from today's webinar. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the high-level key considerations to look for, certainly within the UK-India Free Trade Agreement once it is released, but also generally trading outside of any free trade agreement between ourselves and India. So we're looking at the benefits for your business, an idea of the 6 steps if you want to actually start an export-import business. Also, I'll go through some of the topical points of what constitutes the customs duty triangle, and as part of my initial comments there, the benefits that we could see you gaining from training and education in customs and international trade. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for the free trade agreement, which we've seen some of the news reports coming out, but we're still waiting for the final detail and the final sign-off after all the negotiations have been completed yet. So here are just some of the benefits that we should see, and some of those points here we've already identified in your feedback to one of the poll questions on tariffs, and obviously Dr. Jaydeep was mentioning the non-tariff challenges and focus there as well. investment opportunities, and certainly the improvement on market access. It could be that some of the feedback in one of the polls about those that are intending to or currently not planning is you could be just waiting to see what the results of the free trade agreement are going to give you as traders before then you start putting your plans into place. Protections in business areas as well, data protection, intellectual property, as sort of digital communication ramps up, access to that is becoming much tighter. You've got security, online security as well, which is wrapped up in these elements. So enhancing the protection of your information and your business will be part of the benefit from the free trade agreement. Also, you know, the agreement with a partner country during the negotiation processes, as some of you may have seen, the changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol from the Windsor framework. So even though a free trade agreement is ratified and it's signed off, it can still be revisited and discussed. And then also we've got the overarching organizations of the World Customs Organization and primarily the World Trade Organization, who are basically the ombudsman of trade agreements. So there are avenues to still go back and discuss and potentially change certain aspects of a free trade agreement. So once they're signed, they're not necessarily set in stone forever. Also, I put a link there, the bullet point down at the bottom, because there's no time on the webinar to actually go through what a free trade agreement looks like, but feel free to go in there. What you'll find is that free trade agreements are basically documented and structured in a very similar manner. So you'll find areas and chapters within all of the free trade agreements, such as the rules of origin, whether your products, the classification of your products, can actually comply and benefit from the free trade agreement. If you dig out one of these free trade agreements in this link, or maybe one of your own, if you're in India and you've got a free trade agreement with another country, have a look at that, have a look at the structure, get used to what it looks like. Next slide, please. Thanks, Ewan. So these are just basic 6 steps, more so for those of you that are planning or looking to set up an exporting, importing business. Again, it's getting your basics in order, your processes, your business plans, funding, if you need funding, developing your products, then look for a product to import or export, looking at your suppliers, the compliance, can the suppliers actually provide what you are planning to buy from them and then subsequently sell to the wider market. The pricing of your product, the valuation is quite a key thing, and we'll look at that on another slide in the next few minutes. So again, valuing your product to sell, obviously you want to make profits, but you've got to take into mind your packaging, your processing, transportation, customs costs, other aspects like that all go into that final selling price. Customers, do your due diligence. Are they safe? Are they compliant? Do they meet the same expectations that you're applying on other customers and clients as well as yourself? Are you meeting their expectations? So there's that dialogue, that communication to satisfy both of your concerns and make sure that you feel comfortable. And the logistics, your supply chain, your transportation, your channels, where are you going to move your goods from? Where are they being delivered to? How are you going to get them there? What are the risks? And of course, more costs as well. Thanks, Ewan. Next slide. So as I alluded to a few minutes ago, it's just an example of a customs duty triangle. And going from the top right round to the right, you've got the origin there. You'll see if you look at some of those examples of free trade agreement, they talk about the origin of the goods, and that's where you've produced the goods, where the highest content or the highest value or production, manufacturing production has gone into creating the product that you're going to sell. So there's a kind of balance, and it will be a percentage balance or value of the product. And if you imagine it as a scale, which side of the scale does it tip? Are you manufacturing and applying most of the cost of your product in India? Therefore, your goods can be classed as goods of Indian origin. Or if you're just buying stuff in, bolting it together, and then selling it, it depends on the content and the value of the goods of which country those goods came from. If you are buying them from the UK, then potentially the goods could be classed as UK origin. So look at the free trade agreements that exist, calculate what you're putting in to that product to create the final assembly, and then that will help you determine what the rule of origin is going to be. Valuation, as I intimated earlier, the value, how much you're pricing your goods, that will also constitute how much duty and also import tax could be applied to your products, whether you're importing them into the UK or whether you're importing them into India. Classification, that's where you go into your country-specific tariff, whether you're here in the UK, that's the UK online tariff, as well as other catalogue, technical information. So you need to evidence how you've actually determined how you're going to classify your product, and the same for importation. So if you're importing into India, you may not necessarily be able to use the same code that your UK supplier is providing. So you may need to use that also as evidence and information to help you come up with your own coding. So those three aspects will then go together to calculate how much duty and potentially import tax that you have to pay. Now, of course, the benefits with the free trade agreement is that you can then go into that and identify whether your product actually complies with those rules in that free trade agreement, and you may have a reduced tariff or actually not have to pay any duty tariff at all. These are some of the aspects that ourselves, the IOE and the IIFT, will be looking at to develop some of the training programs to help you learners, give you that more deep domain knowledge and understanding to help you improve your skill set to overcome these activities. Thank you. Next slide.
I just a heads up, Ray, if we could do this slide relatively quickly, just conscious of time.
Yeah. No, thanks, Will. So all of the items that we've been discussing before about the benefits of the free trade agreement, some of the feedback that you've provided, here are some of the benefits and training and education, which we're also going to be looking at. Again, improving your skills base, your knowledge, your standing in the market, expanding your profits, which is one of your primary focuses in your markets, and also satisfying any domestic international authorizations such as AEO. If you've got a very good training structure and you can evidence that training in your skills base, it helps that application process speed up, as well as increasing your competitive edge as well. Thank you. Well, I rushed through that, but of course you'll be getting the slide deck and the recording. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I should say that a lot of these areas are things that the Institute does webinars, training on. So if you do need more information, do go to expert.org.uk to find out where you can get that more information. So on the next slide, I'm just going to do a quick poll, and we'll try and squeeze in a quick user question for Ray as well before we hand over to Professor Jaydeep. So this one's just asking what you see as the most significant challenge in your trade between the UK and India. Ray, just while people are asking that, answering that poll, we've had a question in from Martin about in what ways UK smaller businesses can meet distributors and partners in India. So I wonder if you could, obviously it's not just Indian people on the line, so I'm just wondering if you could answer that question, but also give some general tips about how you can find distributors and partners in international markets, wherever you are from as well.
No, it's great question. There are other organisation bodies such as ourselves. There's the UK-India Trade Organisation that you can actually reach out to and start communicating with, and they can actually give you guidance on how to set up, and depending on the market sector that you're looking at, they can also guide you and direct you to have those discussions. I would certainly suggest and recommend attending trade fairs as well, where traders and Indian businesses will set up, and you can actually go and sort of network and talk to them. There are lots of other trade bodies online. Also, speak to other customers, suppliers that you might have already, and try and get some information out of them. Customs agents, intermediaries are very, very good sources of information, as well as your logistics service providers, your LSPs. So if you're also looking to expand your business activities out to India or vice versa, then speak to them, because they're already in the business of doing customs transactions on goods, moving goods as well. So they're a very good source of information. If they want your business, they'll be quite freely available, giving you top points free. They'll give you free information.
Terrific, some really good tips. Thanks, Ray. I hope that's helpful, Martin. Just a quick show of the answers, really spread actually. So it's about a quarter each for tariffs, logistics, or distance, market access or market knowledge. Again, if you said other, please do say in the chat, but that's a really interesting response actually. I thought tariffs might have been slightly higher given the earlier polls, but again, India is quite far away from the UK, so distance does make sense to some extent. But conscious of time, and on the next slide, it's my delight to welcome back Professor Jaideep Mukherjee from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, who's now going to say a little bit about the importance of businesses learning how to do trade properly in order to make the most of the opportunities that exist between the UK and India, and say a little bit more about the IIFT as well. So over to you, Professor Jaideep.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And basically from most of the poll results, it seems that majority of the attendees are based in UK. So therefore, I will try to devote my talk into two parts. The first 5 minutes I will be speaking about the Institute, about the IIFT, and the next part about how the businesses can learn from the IIFT and the partner institute collaboration in terms of trade between India and UK, and where our institute IIFT can particularly pitch in. So just to start with, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, it has created a benchmark in trade and international business related research and training in India in the last 60 years of its existence. It was set up in 1963 as an institution with a focus on foreign trade related research and training. And since then, it has covered a long way, long distance. And today it is one of the world-class institute, in fact, the top ranked institute in the area of international trade and business, not only in India, but in the entire Asia Pacific region. And basically its success is built on 3 pillars: research, training, and education. This year we are celebrating our Diamond Jubilee year, that is 60 years. And over these 60 years, the institute has successfully emerged from a foreign trade facilitator to a globally networked institute in international trade and finance and business. Now, coming especially to the training program aspect, we have a dedicated cell which we call as a management development program, and IIFT offers a spectrum of training programs in different areas of international business. We are probably the most important think tank in the country so far as WTO and trade policies in India and abroad are concerned. The issues pertaining to market identification and product identification, market access issues, international trade documentation and logistics, global supply chain, foreign trade policies, and trade agreements and negotiations. We offer this training program both for the potential and the existing exporters and traders, as well as to the policymakers in the government, as well as multilateral agencies. Now, coming to India-UK trade, as we all know that the 9th round of India-UK free trade agreement discussion has recently concluded. So the question on everyone's mind is, how close are we to the end game? Before I further proceed, it is very pertinent to ask the question that what is FTA? What is a free trade agreement? So free trade agreement is essential. It's an arrangement between two or more countries or trading blocs that primarily agree to reduce or eliminate custom tariffs and non-tariff barriers on substantial trade between them. So they normally cover both trade in goods such as agricultural or industrial products, or trade in services such as banking, construction, trading, legal services, etc. So FTAs can cover other areas also, such as intellectual property rights, investment, government procurement, competition policy, etc. So in this regard, it is very important to note that most of the free trade agreements today are basically comprehensive agreements that make a holistic, that takes the holistic picture into consideration while they do the negotiation. Now, as I pointed out earlier, both India and UK are the top exporters and importers, both in merchandise as well as in services. Economically, therefore, a trade deal between the two nations makes sense. And as myself and my co-panelists have already pointed out, service plays a very dominant position for both the countries. So a trade deal would only widen the market access for the service firms for both the countries. Now, coming to the proposed training program for the exporters that both the institutes can collaborate. From IIFT's perspective, given our comparative advantage, we can address three important issues in this training program. The first is the analysis of the trade between India and UK over the years at a very disaggregated HS code in order to empirically map out mutually beneficial areas between the two countries that offer an opportunity to enhance the bilateral trade going forward. So in this case, I would like to point out three aspects. The first is to develop the narrative on India-UK trade relationship in the light of the proposed FTA. The second thing, how key events, particularly the geopolitical environment that we all are aware of, have influenced the trade flows. How the direction of UK and India trade has changed because of this geopolitical environment, and how the composition of trade has also changed. So for the evolution of service versus merchandise trade, that is very important for any trade agreement between India and UK. And last but not the least, it is important that IIFT, being a premier training institute in trade analytics, can provide hands-on training on trade databases and trade analytic tools that are widely used in understanding the trade complementarity between two countries, product identification, market access, tariff and non-tariff issues, etc. We can also enhance the knowledge of the exporters in terms of the trade documentation and trade logistic issues that are very important, or that play a very important role in the bilateral trade between the two countries. The second aspect where IIFT can pitch in is that assess India's integration on trade in parts, components, and accessories to understand the degree of production network in various sectors and policy measures to enhance cooperation in global value chain. And last but not in the least is the investment aspect. So analyze the FDI trends and pattern between the two countries, identify where both countries have been successful in promoting productivity, jobs, growth in each other's countries, and potential for future growth in these or newer areas. So to sum up, the proposed training program is expected to benefit the exporters from India and UK by determining the potential export opportunities in terms of products and services, potential opportunities in investment, and recommendations provided is expected to go a long way in fostering trade and investment relation and the overall business relation between the two countries, and it will help to chalk out a closer economic relationship between the two countries. So this is all from my end, and I am sure that it will be mutually beneficial for both the institutes and will enhance the knowledge base of the exporters from both the countries. Thank you, and over to you, William.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Professor Jaydeep. That was a great overview there. So I hope everyone has found that useful. We're just going to do one last poll as we go into a few minutes of Q&A. And this one's just gauging your interest in any training or education or support to help you do more UK-India trade in the future. So that's a simple yes, no answer. Just while people are answering that polls, thank you everyone who has sent in questions so far. We've had a question in from Rajeshwari who says, what opportunities are there for the outsourcing of accounting, payroll, processing work from the UK to India? So kind of outsourcing those sorts of services to India. Dr. Jaydeep, do you want to pick up on that question first? Or possibly not, you might be on mute. If not, Professor Sangeeta, would you like to come in on that question?
Thank you, Will. At this moment, it would be premature to say what would be the precise extent of that. But having said this, I go back to the point by saying the UK and India are primarily service-based economies. Now, trade and services is around 18 billion US dollars. It was in 2019. Now, we understand that there's been a recent decision by the Bar Council which allows lawyers and law firms to practice. But I am not probably the right person to answer the question with regards to the accounting part. So if we could probably ask the IIFT to help here.
Perfect. Is that anything you can come in on, Professor Jaydeep? We can hear you before.
Okay, this particular question, even I am not very, because this is a very specific question, okay? So this probably would require, we have the resource person, but I am not the correct resource person.
Fair enough. Well, that's something we can take offline, hopefully, Rajeshwari. So that's hopefully a little bit of help there, but we can take that offline for sure. It's interesting. Thank you everyone for responding to this. I don't always share the responses to these sorts of polls, but it's interesting that a lot of you would be interested in further training or educational support. So that's really great to see 80% of you, 4/5. So thank you everyone for responding to that. Ewan, if you can move to the next slide, please. We're just going to do a couple of minutes of questions. We've actually just had one in from Ranjana, should be for you, Professor Jaydeep, which is saying, does the IIFT provide any services to SMEs beyond training? Does it provide things like technical helpline support or anything like that? So Professor Jaydeep, over to you on that one.
Yeah, can you please repeat the question? I couldn't able to hear properly.
Absolutely. So does IIFT provide any services to SMEs, smaller businesses, beyond training?
Okay, so IIFT basically do 3-4 types of work. Number one is that we are the premier business school in the country, and we offer MBA in international business. So in addition to that, we offer a lot of executive programs ranging from 3 months to 6 months to even more than a year, or 18 months also. So these are basically diploma and certificate programs. We also conduct a lot of online MBA, online full diploma programs in international trade and business. So most of our what is called the comparative advantage are in the area of international trade and international business. So this is basically training. Number two is education. The third aspect which we constantly do is research. So we do research for policy research. Basically, I'm not speaking of journal publication alone, but policy research. We are a think tank to the government of India. So every year IIFT does more than 7 to 10 research projects for the Indian government, as well as for multilateral agencies like World Bank, like private players like Walmart, etc. So research is a very important. Research projects, policy-based research are also a very important component of our pool of activities that we do.
Thank you, Professor JD. I hope that was helpful, Ranjana. I've had a really interesting question in from Harry, which is saying, is it correct to say that India is now generally opening up to international markets and not just the UK? Professor JD, do you want to start on that one, and then I'll bring in Professor Sangeeta?
I think this is not very correct. India has been opening up to the world market significantly. In fact, but the thing that remains is, unlike many countries like, for example, US, or even for UK or advanced countries, right? India's domestic consumption demand is so high. So even when there are some global mishaps in terms of the recession or crisis, we are decoupled from that because of our domestic consumption demand. But that doesn't mean that we are not opening up to the rest of the world, right? Our exports have reached the record high level in recent times, and definitely in terms of investment, we are the top destination of the foreign multilaterals, foreign multinational companies to invest in India. So I don't think that we stay within ourselves. We have definitely opened up, and we are opening up in large scale at present.
Professor Sangeeta, anything to add to that?
Thank you so much, Phil. I would like to add here that let's look at probably the opening up question is from the perspective of India's renewed commitment towards free trade agreements. Because if we look at it from that perspective, yes, India is opening up increasingly and warming up to the idea of doing trade agreements. It's done with the UAE, Australia. It has ongoing negotiations with Canada, the UK, Israel. It's reviewing agreements with Japan, South Korea. It's revived talks with Oman, SACU, EU. So clearly there is momentum when it comes to engaging with other partners for FTAs. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'm just going to do one last question, and I'll put it to Ray. It's more of a comment from Lindsay, who says her company has struggled to get goods into India once they reach the Indian border due to incorrect information and paperwork, and these goods have been seized and destroyed. Ray, can you just talk about what companies Lindsay should be doing to avoid that situation happening?
No, great question. It's something that I experienced in the industry that I was working with a few years ago. One of the things we did is we actually set up a pre-alert exercise between ourselves and our customer. So using India as an example, we were exporting products to India, and we identified some challenges there. So what we did is we set up a meeting with our counterparts in India and said, okay, what exactly do we need to do as the seller of these products? What documents are you looking for? How do you want the information laid out? Because one of the challenges we face is that there was this requirement to identify the difference between new and used products, because the customs processing is different when they arrive. So we actually said, okay, then what's your recommendation for this? And they recommended that we actually identify different lines for new and used products on our commercial invoice. We pack them separately. So used goods went into one crate, new products went into another. So what we then did is we said, right, we're going to send you all of our documentation now, and we asked them to approve the documentation in advance before we actually booked transportation. So that did alleviate things. It added about 48 hours to the process, but it took out 2 weeks of delays and also really mitigated against the risk of stoppages once the goods have actually arrived.
Terrific. That sounds like very good advice. I hope that's been helpful, Lindsay, and anyone else on the call who's experienced such issues. But at this point, we've hit the witching hour, so we're going to have to start wrapping up. I'd like to say thank you again to today's speakers in Professor Sangeeta, Professor Jaydeep, as well as Ray for your time and the presentations. Sorry, Reza. It's just a fire alarm, which I think might be a drill, so apologies about that. I'll keep on going, so I don't think you can hear that as well as I can. So great, I can hear myself think again now. So a lot of information there, I hope, but I hope we've been able to give a decent overview of the opportunities that already exist for UK-India trade, as well as the potential impact of a new trade agreement between the two countries. Before we go on the final slide, please, Ewan, just a quick plug of an event the Institute is running in July. MemberCon is the Institute's main member-driven event featuring a world-class lineup of industry leaders alongside the Institute's excellent experts covering all things customs and trade, as well as being a great opportunity to network with your fellow exporters and trade professionals. It really is a great chance to put your trade and customs questions to our experts, particularly in a series of Q&A clinics that are taking place throughout the day. It's taking place on 5th July in Liverpool, and you can find out more details on the website. On the site, you can also find out details about our future webinars, including a follow-up session we're running on Britain's draft border of target operating model, a paper that could have significant implications for businesses moving goods from the EU into Britain. That's on Tuesday, 23rd May from 1 to 2:30 p.m. British time. Again, you can go to the website for more information about this and all our webinars. And a reminder, we will be sending the slides and recording of today's webinar in the follow-up email you should be getting in the next day or so. Please get in touch if for any reason this email doesn't come through to your main inbox. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for the webinar. As you leave, please do let us know what you thought of today's session and any suggestions for topics in future events by completing the short exit survey. But for now, goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Nice talking with you all.